Can you hear me? Still talking. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we're broadcasting now.
Oh. All right.
We've got about 3 more minutes. Everybody that's on the line. Looks like we've got about 30 people already on the line watching. So we're going to wait here. And John Sellek just signed off. He should be back on. And Adrian Hemond should be here shortly as well. So bear with us.
Hey, John and Kyle. Unfortunately, I had to scramble this morning. My hotel Wi-Fi was not up to the task, so I'm at the Starbucks in Traverse City. If you're here in Traverse City, come visit me. But I'll be going on mute whenever I can to keep it quiet.
Okay, sounds good.
Also, let's mark this down that I beat Adrian and showed out someplace first. That never happens. I'm marking this thing.
Duly noted. Well, he just texted me, so he's got the link. He should be here any second, hopefully. But we can always start without him and talk about gubernatorial stuff.
Let's see here. You know, I'm just looking at how Ballinger did with his picks. So he.
I want to say that we're broadcasting now, Kyle.
Oh yeah, I know. Well, he was on the podcast saying what his picks are. I can say what mine are too.
There he is.
Oh, he got that.
There he is.
Hey, Adrian.
You guys got sounds? We're good?
Well, we got sound. I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen. We're about a minute off from starting.
Oh, I did predict Van Orkum. Yeah, I think I only got Meyer wrong.
All right. Can everybody see the screen okay? Slides?
Yes. Yep.
Fantastic. All right. It's 11 o'clock, so let's get started. I want to thank everyone who has joined us today. We have a lot of material to go over. I first want to thank Adrian Hemond of Grassroots Midwest and John Sellek of Harbor Strategic, as well as my business partner and good friend Kyle Melinn for putting this together with me. We're going to start with the gubernatorial, and then we're going to go through some districts, the congressionals of note, and then we're going to look at a list that Kyle made up a couple weeks ago of incumbents that might be in trouble. We'll go through those races, and then we're going to look at some incumbent on incumbent races, and then we're going to conclude by talking about how. And I believe Kyle's got some analysis on how the DeVos groups did as far as their endorsement rate and their success rate. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and get started. Let's start with the gubernatorial. Anybody surprised here? You want to start, Adrian, and talk about what you saw and what your reaction was last night?
Yeah, I think a recurring theme in talking about these races around the state is that money matters. Trump endorsement's great. It's certainly very helpful for a Republican, but you got to have the money to tell people about it. Tudor Dixon did, got it at the last minute, but she had the money to make a push down the stretch because of the funding that she got from the sort of DeVos alliance of folks. And that was able to pull her through. She took a small lead when she got the infusion of cash, and she got a bigger lead when she got the Trump endorsement and could tell everybody about it.
John, he mentioned money. How important was Trump's thing coming out on Friday for Tudor?
At this point, I think the Trump endorsement essentially was the thing that boosted her to such a large victory. We have to think back to earlier in the campaign, and it seems like there's been 17 campaigns within this one primary since a year ago, May, when James Craig first got in. And Tudor Dixon was consistently in the low single digits. But I always thought she was going to be the wild card of the primary because she was the one that had the best communication skills, especially in this digital age. Obviously honed through her work as a conservative news broadcaster, but through some of her other experiences, she just needed to be able to get up on a bigger platform and be able to have more people see her. And sure enough, as soon as that funding was put in place, regardless of where it came from, that worked. At the same time, I'd say that money doesn't equal everything. You need to have money, but you have to be able to have the message that you're spreading out there actually cut through. If we look back to when James Craig was knocked off the ballot, his staying power in the Southeast Michigan market was pretty unbelievable. I think it was bigger than any of us had really anticipated overall, and that left a huge vacuum. And I remember at the time thinking that Kevin Rinke was the one who had the true opportunity at that point because he could stroke the check, get the ads on the air, and bust into that market and take that. But instead, what happened over time is that Tudor Dixon took a bigger chunk of that vote, and Rinke had to spend a lot of money out state to try to pull his numbers up. And so that messaging is really important. I'm sure we'll talk about that a little bit more, but that made a difference as well.
Yeah,
Kyle,
I think,
I'm wondering if... Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, you know, what struck me about these numbers, John, was going back, as Sellek said, to an earlier point in the campaign when we were right before the Detroit Chamber event, and Tudor wasn't even cresting at 5% to even be invited initially to the Detroit Chamber event. If Craig and Perry Johnson don't get disqualified from the ballot, she doesn't even make the Detroit Chamber debate. So it was kind of a fortunate set of circumstances that put her here to begin with. You take a look also at the money that she raised. You got to go back to Dick Posthumus in 2002, and actually before Dick Posthumus, to find somebody who raised less than Tudor Dixon raised by herself, her campaign. Even Dick Posthumus, not even adjusting for inflation, raised more money in 2002 than Tudor Dixon did. So that just shows you how important it was that Tudor Dixon got the support of the DeVosses, who were willing to use that PAC to put ads up in the air. And I'd also want to say that if Rinke's ads were better, he should be where Tudor Dixon is. But for whatever reason, that zombie ad didn't connect at all. He kept airing it in Southeast Michigan. It didn't move his numbers at all. And then Dixon just put actually just a fraction of what Rinke put in Detroit with just kind of a standard run-of-the-mill ad, and her numbers just took off. So I think the quality of the advertisement and the ability to do it is really kind of what separated her from Rinke and then Saldano and Kelly, who didn't really have a pot to piss in.
I think that's really important.
Kyle, I love you give a plug for good political consulting. That's top notch.
The return on investment for Kevin Rinke was not good. You can think about why that is. He wanted to rerun basically the campaign of Glenn Youngkin in Virginia. Not a terrible strategy. It worked for him, but there ended up being some major differences. First, that Trump actually was behind in supporting Youngkin the whole time. The trick of that campaign was that Youngkin figured out how to keep Trump close behind the scenes, but not in front of the scenes. And that allowed the second part, which is Youngkin was able to sell Trumpism with a smiling face and a dad fleece vest and all those other things he got made fun of. But his personality carried the day on those ads too. That's not easy. And so to just plump another person into the same cookie cutter and think it might work is hard. And I think that his campaign even noticed that they had hit a ceiling despite all that spending. That's why we saw them sneak in an ad in mid-July that said they had Donald Trump in it and said, hey, look, Donald Trump's a strong leader. They weren't showing the border wall. They weren't showing people running for freedom in the U.S. across the border. They just showed Trump looking tough, and then they turned over to Rinky. So they realized they had to get a little bit of that Trump magic going, because that strategy was not working. They couldn't just repeat that strategy. And then the other thing I'll mention, I think Kyle kind of touched on this, sometimes in politics, it's better to be lucky than good, or you need a little good fortune. And this unbelievable collapse of James Craig and Perry Johnson was a huge fortune for Tudor Dixon and their team, whether it's her campaign directly or not, figured out how to take advantage of it.
I'm wondering if you guys could each comment on putting Tudor Dixon up against Gretchen Whitmer. How do they line up? Where are the weak spots? Where are the strong spots for both of them? I mean, is this the best matchup the Republicans have or could have had?
You know, I mean, of the candidates that were left after the disqualifications, this is probably as good as they could have done out of the 5 remaining. They started a big disadvantage for a variety of reasons. The first is money, right? Gretchen Whitmer has it and their candidate does not. And that's going to be a big part of the task for Tudor Dixon over the coming weeks. Realistically, she needs to be raising about $1.5 million a week starting today. And so that puts her pretty squarely behind the 8 ball. That's disadvantage number 1. Disadvantage number 2 is she starts in essentially the same position that she started this Republican primary process, which is that outside of the Republican primary electorate, nobody knows who she is, right? Everybody knows who the governor of Michigan is. Whether you like or dislike the governor, you know that that's Gretchen Whitmer. Most people in Michigan don't really know who Tudor Dixon is. And that's why she needs to go out and raise that $1.5 million a week, which is a very tall order, because she needs to buy name ID. And that's not cheap. She's not going to be able to get arrested at the Capitol and buy name ID that way. Like, she's going to have to do it the old fashioned way with television ads and direct mail. So I think those are the major drawbacks on the Tudor Dixon side. The biggest one, of course, is that video clip about the perfect case with the raped teenager. You're not going to hear anything else about that from Tudor Dixon, but you're going to hear a lot about it from Democrats over the coming months. Biggest drawback for Governor Whitmer is the president. About the only thing that's polling worse than the president right now is the Congress and the clap. And so Gretchen Whitmer's done a really good job of avoiding the president up until this point. And she needs to continue to do so because most people think that guy sucks.
All right. Moving on from the Congress and the clap. So we'll go to the next slide. All right. John Gibbs kind of surprised everybody. I'm not sure that maybe they should have been surprised, but you want to give us your read on this, Kyle?
Yeah, I think this just speaks to how popular Trump still is in a Republican stronghold. And, you know, if you looked at the 2020 election results in West Michigan, Peter Meijer actually did better than Donald Trump in just about every area of greater Grand Rapids, whether it was Cascade or Kentwood or Byron, he did better. Now, what happened, though, is that his vote against Trump to impeach him just betrayed too much of the rank and file over there. And it was just something they couldn't get over. And I know that he talked on our podcast that people didn't bring it up. Well, they didn't have to bring it up. They knew. And they knew what they were going to do. And it just kind of came back at him. To John Gibbs's credit, though, I mean, he came in to a district that he didn't live in and really endeared himself. You know, he did as much as he could with as little as he had, and really made himself very personable and very likable. He had with that and the Trump support, that was really just about all he needed. That and the Democrats thinking that he's going to be an easy person to take out with Hillary Scholten in November. You had a little of that TV in there, and Peter Meijer's goose was cooked.
I wonder, Adrian, if you think that that Scholten's got an easy path with Gibbs in November.
It's certainly easier, right? You know, I mean, Peter Meijer is a normal, fairly moderate Republican, and John Gibbs is mentally hilarious. So I think that certainly advantaged Skolton, especially because it's a Dem lean district now. I think, Peter Meyer wins that primary. He probably finds a way to hold on because he is, moderate and legible to most people who live in that congressional district. That's different from John Gibbs. And Hillary Skolton almost beat Peter Meyer, who's a much better candidate in a much better district for Republicans 2 years ago. There are certainly plenty of reasons why she might not be able to come out on top, but you have to call her a pretty heavy favorite at this point.
Right. John, I'm curious if you think that the abortion vote coming this fall will impact this race.
It's going to affect races everywhere for sure. And I know that if you're paying attention to the national media last night, what happened in Kansas is kind of an earthquake for a lot of people when they see such a large no vote there, which means the footprint is way bigger than what the partisan footprint was on that issue. I'm kind of wondering what will happen here is something similar, that the ballot initiative essentially creates an off-ramp for women and men who support reproductive rights and think, okay, I don't have to depend on a politician like Governor Whitmer is painting herself to be the one protector, the only one that can save the day. They can just vote on that issue, and then they can compartmentalize that, set that aside and say, okay, now I can get back to worrying about not being able to pay my bills. Now I can worry about my kids suffering learning loss, and what am I going to do about that? So it'll be interesting to see that play out. So I do think that Kansas kind of gives us a hint that the ballot initiative on abortion in Michigan could actually outperform Governor Whitmer and therefore leave room for people to go the other way. I didn't want to say on the Gibbs primary, we absolutely couldn't be surprised with the result. And what a roller coaster, Kyle and John, that it's been in West Michigan. A lot of folks, saw the rise and the national curiosity that Justin Amash became. The establishment there was getting really tired of that show. They wanted somebody they could work with and get some things done, and not just another presentation of how they voted no on something. And they thought they got that in Peter Meyer, and boom, he's gone. And if they thought they didn't have control over Justin Amash, I'm pretty certain we're probably going to see they don't have any control at all over John Gibbs should he win. The Democrat advertising that happened over the last 2 weeks, you could tell it completely drove the Meyer campaign insane. They actually somehow took the time to write an op-ed that appeared in an online publication, I can't remember which it was, complaining about the Democrats coming in there and spending $500,000, more than Gibbs had spent the entire campaign. But all Gibbs needed to do in this particular race, I know we're going to talk about a lot of other Trump endorsements, all the Gibbs had to do is be an acceptable replacement for Meyer, because Meyer did all the work for him or for the Trump team just with that first vote. So that was how Meyer got defined right from the get-go. And as long as there was somebody acceptable, we've seen in Kent County when there's somebody who's not acceptable, like R.J. Regan, they kick him to the side. But there's a pretty big footprint of people who are pretty partisan but are still looking for somebody acceptable to be in that office, who just see almost anything that you do with the Democrats as a betrayal, because we're so divided partisanly that vote always had locked in what was going to happen to Peter Meyer. And I saw there was a ton of negative ads from the Meyer campaign, from third groups, but from his camp, on Gibbs that in other years, or at least in the past, would have worked, that he was a carpetbagger and didn't come from there. West Michigan likes to have their own. That he worked for big tech because he had worked for Apple and Palm. That's a negative in the GOP right now. And that he was the one handing out $9 billion of COVID money all over the country in his position in office. And those things didn't work.
Gotcha. Kyle, you want to run over the 10th congressional for us? Any surprises here?
Well, I think the margin from former Judge Carl Marlinga is pretty impressive. I think all four of the remaining candidates had some types of dreams that Carl Marlinga was a little stale, maybe a little long in the tooth. Maybe the folks there in Macomb had been there, done that, and thought that maybe he brought a little bit too much baggage from past issues with the law that never really went anywhere. But the answer is that the folks in Macomb County obviously saw Carl Marlinga as an old sweater that they're more than happy to put on during this time. I'm surprised.
Kyle, you can't go for quote of the day on your own publication. That's not fair.
I never give our own staff quote of the day, John. That's a rule here.
If I have any surprises at all on this, though, it's that Henry Yanez finished last, even though the margins here are so small that it really doesn't make any difference. But Rhonda Powell finishing in second, maybe that just kind of speaks to a growing Black population in Macomb County, just something to keep an eye on. Her 17% better than a sitting member of the Warren City Council, Ueda Aref, ran a heck of a campaign. She had some resources too. So, maybe Rhonda Powell's got something in her future. But I think this is kind of the end of the line for Henry. I mean, he just lost state Senate 4 years ago. And, this is pretty underwhelming, what he was able to pull off here.
Any thoughts on Marlinga versus James?
I wouldn't discount Carl Marlinga. The reason is he is Macomb County, and this district is so much Macomb County that it means something. John James said he would move into the district if he won it. Well, that doesn't work with everybody there in Macomb. They're pretty territorial and a little insular. They kind of, Candace Miller gets along with Mark Hackle, and they all kind of understand each other. They got Pete Lucido, and they deal with him, but he's kind of our problem. And I don't know. It's kind of a different mentality out there from what I've seen. So while John James has the bucks and he's going to be able to spend it, I wouldn't discount Carl Marlinga, and I wouldn't be surprised if this race actually is pretty close.
Gotcha. All right, let's go to on to the next slide. Andy Levin kind of got waxed, didn't he?
Yeah, well, so speaking of money mattering, money mattered a lot here. And not just the money that Congresswoman Stevens was able to raise and spend this election cycle, right? She's been in competitive general elections, the 2 prior cycles as well. She actually lost the Oakland County portion of her district 2 years ago and got bailed out by the Wayne County portion. Prior to that, she took out an incumbent with a pretty popular last name in Nolenberg, which means that millions and millions of dollars had been spent on television to build her name ID prior to this race even taking place. The only time you saw the Levins on TV the last few years was the announcement of another retirement, right? Sandy's retiring, Carl's retiring. The Levin name is great in Southeast Michigan, but it didn't have the millions of dollars behind it. And that disadvantage only grew in the campaign this year, where she was able to outraise him because she's been in competitive general elections in the not too distant past, where she's had to raise money, not just in Michigan, but nationally, to finance those races. She had the fundraising network. She was able to keep a couple of key players from organized labor out of this race, and that was it.
Yeah, I agree with everything Adrian had said there. And the first Andy Levin growing up inside that legacy doesn't mean he was going to be good at it. We talk about businesses who go through multiple generations, and the second and third generation isn't always the same as the first. I think we're seeing a little bit something different with Kildee and the Kildee clan and how that worked out. I don't think Andy was awesome in this role, and he kind of was like an odd puzzle piece. He suddenly was like super progressive, and that's not the Levin brand overall. It certainly wasn't Carl's brand. He certainly was a liberal, but not progressive in the way that he would have. Would we have ever seen Carl Levin go and get himself arrested 14 times as a desperate play in an election? Probably not. And then the flip side being that Haley Stevens is where so much of the energy of the party is. She kind of had 2 ideal messaging things dovetail. One, that she's a woman, and that was emphasized in her ads, and that's super important right now, especially in Oakland County. But at the same time, she played the more down-to-earth, what's happening today that I can help you with, and that is saving the auto industry. And she played that card. She got to play the Obama card, who's now more popular than Joe Biden, by using all that old footage. But she was able to talk about things similar to like how Governor Whitmer is trying to do in her ad, saying, we're helping you right now. Here's something tangible I can point to that we did. She keeps pointing at the auto job. So combining her gender advantage with that kind of real everyday delivery stuff, I think really worked for her. And then like Adrian says, Haley Stevens and Elsa Slotkin have become major national small dollar fundraisers, and they're going to continue to do so.
Other thing I think bears noting here, and it wasn't as important as the money and the sort of experience and the things that John and I just talked about, but I think that Congresswoman Brenda Lawrence deserves a little bit of credit for her knife work here. Some of you may recall when she ran for Congress, Congressman Levin's father endorsed a different candidate in that race, and she paid him back. And I think that that also hurt Congressman Levin quite a bit in this race.
All right. Anything you want to add, Kyle?
No, only that I wonder if Levin is thinking that he should have just run in the 10th district where he actually had more name ID, he had a bigger constituency base, and he may have had a better crack at John James. But then again, he would have had to move into that district to run into it as well. So there would have been some life changes, and maybe he wouldn't have been able to run as kind of the liberal that we're now finding that he kind of sees himself as being. So maybe I guess it's for the best, but of course, I'm sure it's very easy to play Monday morning quarterback with his choice in running in this district to begin with.
All right, let's talk 13th. Adrian, another case of Shree's money pulling him through.
Yeah, the money matters a lot here. I've been saying for months about this race that the candidate that could dominate in the suburbs would win. That is, in fact, what happened, and it's because of the money, right? Adam Hollier put in a credible performance in terms of fundraising. If Shree Tanadar is not in this race, he wins it. But the problem is that Shree had money to go out and communicate with the voters who didn't know most of these candidates, right? Most of these candidates were running out of the city of Detroit. The city of Detroit typically turns out at pretty poor levels in Democratic primaries. It was worse this year. When we finally get done unpacking all the numbers, that much is going to be crystal clear. But the suburbs vote at higher rates than the city of Detroit does. Shree had the money to go and communicate with those voters who didn't know all of these candidates, and it pulled him through by a decent margin.
Yeah.
All right.
I think, I want to credit Adrian, a long time ago, I think on one of our earlier versions of these or some other place I was with him, he very early on wisely pointed out that this race was probably going to be decided in downriver, and it sure the heck was. From the numbers that I've seen so far, Shree did well there, and he had the money to do that. Adam Hollier is a super hard-charging, super hard-working candidate. I will be surprised if we don't see him running for something again. Even with Duggan and the outside money that came in, it was hard to challenge somebody who could write their own checks, but also have good messaging. So we monitored all the ads in this race. Shree had one ad after another. He clearly learned his lesson from 2018. He had all kinds of ads in the can that he was running from third-party validators, his children, his wife, his former employees that he was handing checks to. All those things brought light to what kind of a humorous, funny guy is, and that was the other key. He had a couple ads that I actually laughed at pretty good. Like, I don't know if you guys saw, there was the ad where the voice of God voice that would be like, Shree Tanadar does X, Y, and Z for America. That voice would start popping up as he went around talking to regular people, even at dinner with his wife. She's like, what the hell? Humor and likability actually still matter. And that came across in his advertising. So he probably should have ran for state rep the first time and worked his way up, but it's his money, not mine.
Yeah, right when these lines were finalized and we knew we were going to have a 13th congressional district that didn't include an incumbent, I talked to Senator Ollier and asked him what he thought needed to happen. He said that the Black community's got to get around a consensus candidate or else Shree's going to win it. And he was exactly right. The Black community did not get around a consensus candidate, and Shree did win it. I know he thought that he could be that, and he did a good job to a certain extent, but this ended up just being just like Brenda Jones versus Rashida Tlaib and that cast of characters just a few years ago. It's the same thing that happened. Except Shree had even more money than Rashida Tlaib was able to raise because he had it in his bank account, and he slid right by these people. He is endearing. He's a real nice guy face to face. I mean, I know he's got a lot of money, but he's really got a charming personality, and he's really a great guy to talk to. So he connects well with people if you can get him one-on-one and in small groups. He's just self-depreciating enough to have some charm to him. So yeah, I know the polling showed that it was going in this way, and with this many African-American candidates, it shouldn't really surprise anybody that this happened.
And, you know, frankly, Ollier didn't need to get even Portia Roberson's votes here, right? If he gets Sherry's votes, he wins. If he gets John Conyers' votes, he wins. If he gets Griffey's votes, it's a tie, essentially, right? So he didn't even need the next top vote getter's votes. I mean, that just sort of speaks to how important the splintering of the black vote was in the new 13th. You know, the third, fourth, or fifth place finishers' votes were enough to get him over the top. There were just too many candidates running out of the city.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, moving on, let's start. Kyle, this is your list. You want to walk us through these incumbents in trouble? And start with the 59th?
Yeah, so so this was our list of incumbents that were in trouble, and as it turned out, the top two did end up being in trouble enough to lose. Terrence Bukowski, just kind of a strange situation for him in that he faced Doug Wozniak earlier this year in a Republican special election for the Senate and lost. And then now has to face him again because Wozniak got drawn in with Ruth Johnson, and for the Senate didn't want to do that. So now he's going back to his House district. This wasn't very close for a lot of reasons. Wozniak just is so ingrained in that Shelby Township community. He beat Pete Lund's wife. I think we can remember that. And that one wasn't even really close either. The other thing is Bukowski had an illness that he came down with in June, and it took him off the House floor. He wasn't around for about 6 weeks. And when he did show up, he was in a wheelchair. So he wasn't doing doors. So, you know, while he was the incumbent, he wasn't really the incumbent. It was almost like he was a placeholder. And so while that was a bust, you know, that's the way it goes. Rodney Wakeman on the other one there, that was a tough gig for him. He thought, you know, he got drawn into a district that was completely Democratic, you know, with Amos O'Neill. That wasn't going to work for him. But if he moved too far out of the district, he was going to run against Graham Filler, and he didn't really want to do that either because Graham Filler is like the Energizer bunny out there as far as campaigning. So then he moved into a different district altogether after he found out that the state Senate wasn't going to work for him. He basically had to move over by Frankenmuth, which is nowhere near his funeral home. And it just didn't work because Matt Bierlein had already started campaigning for weeks and months, and Bierlein had actually run a good campaign against Phil Green just 2 years ago, or a few years ago rather, and you know that he was going uphill. The polling never showed him doing very well. He probably should have pulled the plug and not done it at all, but it's kind of the way it goes. So yeah, Bierlein wins that one, and then. Do you want to go on the next slide, or you want to go other?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So Van Workum, the polling showed him losing to Mick Bricker. It wasn't that long ago, and maybe John knows when that was, but there was a huge rallying cry to save Van Workum for a lot of different reasons. One, I think the traditional Republican caucus there wanted to just kind of stick it to Maddock for recruiting his sister or his daughter's wife's or his daughter's husband's father to run against an incumbent, which, you know, they just find extremely unseemly. And so they made it a real effort to circle the wagons and get some help for Van Workum. And this one wasn't even close. They really did a number on Bricker in Ottawa County, which is really new territory for Van Workum and actually Mick Bricker's backyard. So kudos to Van Workum. That's a heck of a showing there. And then Kim Lasada, this was a tough draw for her. She had to move into this district against Jonathan Lindsay. I mean, he did too, but he actually grew up in Bronson. He was like the Bronson hometown boy, and I I didn't know this until our Samantha Schreiber talked to him. He actually sought out this Trump endorsement on his own. He didn't go through Matt Maddox to get it. He actually knows somebody through his wife who got him in touch with who he needed to get in touch with to get Trump's endorsement by himself. That just kind of speaks to the go get him kind of attitude that he had. And he's also a very likable kind of guy. So, Losada didn't have much of a record. And so you combine that with the regular America First stuff, like why didn't you investigate the 2020 election with a forensic audit and the whole kit and caboodle. And Losada was just kind of toast. She didn't even win her own county.
I think that one bears noting because Jonathan Lindsay this guy's just getting warmed up, right? He might as well have been grown in a lab to run for office. The Green Beret, the Yale education, local boy made good, went and got his own Trump endorsement. If I'm Tim Walberg, I'm looking over my shoulder right now. Like he's done it before, he'll do it again. And this is another example where money matters, right? Lindsay started raising money last year, including boatloads of money outside the state, and he was able to go dollar for dollar with the incumbent, and he had the Trump endorsement. Watch out for this guy.
Yeah, I agree with Adrian on that point. I had to disclosure. I know Jonathan. I've worked with him on things in the past. His resume is amazing, but his personality and his standing is also so good at fits. Like Adrian said, the American First mold, 100%. His father-in-law is Art Lapper, for those of you old enough to remember Reaganomics and everything from the day. Pretty well-known guy. So you use that connection, but he had to go out and win that race. And he did it in convincing fashion. If you watch his ads, he also drove the muscle cars and did it to better effect than Kevin Rinke, apparently. But I would say, I think now you've got to watch. Tim Walberg doesn't always need to. Tim Walberg doesn't only need to look out for him. I think Lindsay's going to be really active in the Senate and is likely to get into leadership.
All right, now we're going to move on. If we're going to make our deadline, we got to boogie a little. So you want to talk about 67th?
Yeah, Phil Green. He worked his tail off and needed to. He only had about 3% of his current House district in this new district. What he did have working for him is the fact that this field is enormous, and he was able to slice and dice. He was able to slice and dice that to a victory. The other thing is too that his dad, when he represented the Senate, represented a lot of this territory, and so the folks in Lapeer knew him. A little bit of Tuscola knew him. So while he was new to it, the Green name was not. So that was an advantage that he had over Rodney Wakeman. Also, he got in right at the beginning. He didn't equivocate when he saw the lines. He said, you know what, this is a tough break for me. District's not anything like what I had, but you know what, I'm going to run in it and we'll just see what happens. And he was victorious. It was obviously a little closer than he might have wanted, but I think he was just hoping for a W and he got one.
All right. Fink versus Meckley.
Yeah, Fink actually, he and Meckley were pretty much neck and neck in all the counties but Branch, and I don't know why Branch of all counties, but he maybe it's because he's already represented that area, and so they knew him there, and they didn't know the Meckley farms. Cement City's far enough away that they didn't know you could buy fruit up there. I don't know, but. Fink also worked hard. He took this challenge very seriously. And I think he too was really put off that Matt Maddox had work to try and get Steve Meckley into this race. And not only that, tried to hush hush under the radar, badmouth him in front of the Hillsdale County Republicans. He didn't really like that all that much. And I think he took great offense to it and made it maybe more personal that he was going to win this thing than maybe other races. And then, Dave Martin, we had on there just because of the vigor from Kristen Swanson, because she was a true America First, pandemic, lockdown, bad, mama bear kind of candidate. She just didn't have the resources, and I don't think she was on maybe enough people's radar soon enough in order to kind of take off.
All right. Helena Scott pulled it out this morning. And before we get into this, Cal and all you guys, can you talk a little bit? It seemed to me there was a lot of counties that weren't reporting in a timely fashion this morning. I mean, I'm used to Wayne not coming in until mid-morning, but we had at 7 a.m. We had 7 counties that didn't have results up yet to the state. What was going on?
Well, there's a lot of paranoia out there amongst clerks since the 2020 election about chain of custody around ballot bags. There's also there's like the fake conspiracy about the plot to overthrow elections, which again is fake. And then there's the real problem, which is our decaying voting infrastructure. And that we have not made sufficient investments in, particularly at the local level, and making the machinery at the local level talk to the county level and then to the state level. We've done a poor job of investing in that. It's been horribly neglected. And that's the real scandal here, which of course no one is talking about it because there's a fake scandal to talk about instead. The interaction of those two things has been very, very bad for getting election results in a timely fashion. Thankfully, one of my employees just had a baby, so he was up last night watching anyway. But for normal people, that really sucks.
Yeah, when I started seeing tweets about clerks having 3G modem, I was like, what?
What? Is this like 2015?
Yeah, I mean, in Macomb County, they actually were driving results to the county clerk's office. I mean, precinct captains were driving them. They didn't trust even just doing that electronically. So that slowed Macomb County way down. We didn't get final results from them until like 4 a.m, which is unusual.
That is unusual. You want to walk us through these two races, Kyle?
Yeah, the race with Helena Scott was actually a little closer, but she was one of the few Detroiters who was able to survive this redraw in which Detroit was mixed in with a suburban area and in every single Senate and House district. The Detroiters in general did not do very well in these kind of arrangements. She was the exception rather than the rule, but she also was an incumbent, and the incumbents kind of stuck together. We had a Regina Weiss next door. Together, they did stuff together. I think Samantha Steckloff stepped up, and she they kind of worked as a team to try and help Helena win in the suburbs because they knew that's where the race was going to be won. And so that result there, that was a lot closer than that. But she did win and gave the Detroiters a seat in the House. But they are going to lose. Detroit is going to have one fewer member from Detroit in the state House because of these maps, which is actually better than the Senate, which is losing 3 people from the city of Detroit, which is really just kind of amazing to think about, that we're going to just go down to Sylvia Santana and Stephanie Chang as your members from Detroit in the state Senate. Erica Geis won. She's from Taylor, and she counted on her colleagues to help her out quite a bit in this race. You see Brenda Sanders there, former judge, was doing very well in Detroit in early returns. But Erica Geis obviously was able to get Taylor together, and they had enough foot soldiers in Detroit to help her secure the win.
All right. Lana Tice beat Mr. Detmer pretty soundly, didn't she?
Yeah, this is so Trump endorsed Detmer just like he endorsed Jonathan Lindsay, but this just goes to show you that a Trump endorsement will get you so far. It ain't going to take you the whole way. Detmer didn't have half the energy Jonathan Lindsay did. He was more of a Facebook keyboard warrior. He was more stuck to philosophy and kind of going to war over social media than making friends and meeting people and going around the district and having like a real campaign, like Jonathan Lindsay did. Detmer really kind of treated this like the congressional election. He just wasn't able to expand much from his pretty tight-knit base, and he just wasn't able to get past Lana Tice, who really, really worked hard. My reports from Livingston County were that she was everywhere. She went to every event where 5 or more people were. So was Lana Tice. And if you look at the other areas of this district, her and Detmer kind of ran neck and neck. But you look at Livingston County, and she just blew them up, and that's where she won the race.
Yeah. Lucky, I live in her district. I was a recipient of probably like 15 pieces of mail from a multitude of groups. The entities out there were full bore on supporting her. I was hit by digital every single time I stepped onto any social media channel in support of her. So her team, the third party teams, they all did a really good job of building her up. And like, I think I agree with you, Kyle, the Trump endorsement only gets you so far. For Gibbs, it works because Meyer made it the issue right from the start because of the vote he had to take on impeachment. In some other races, if you didn't have any money and you hadn't really run for office before, it didn't work out so great. But it's clear that even here, the parties that wanted to keep Lana in place were willing to invest the money, even when it seemed like somebody like Detmer didn't have the resources to counter and really take advantage of the endorsement.
All right. Let's move on to our $1 million senator. Was this all the result of her floor speech, or is it redistricting?
I think it's a combination. It's a combination. And Mallory McMorrow, I mean, she ran in a competitive race 4 years ago and knows what that's like going up against the Republican incumbent at that time, Marty Nolenberg, and unseating him. So she's worked really hard. And Marshall Bullock didn't have the support of Mike Duggan this time. Duggan really sat things out. He didn't really get involved in a lot of primaries. And let's face it, I mean, Detroiters just don't vote in primaries to the same extent folks in the suburbs do. They just don't. And Bullock needed to be a lot more active up in the suburbs, and he just really wasn't.
I know. Marshall Bullock was defeated by the redistricting commission. If the redistricting commission had bothered to look at primary turnout data, everybody could have told you what was going to happen here. They didn't do that, and as a result, they hung an L on him. She raised a lot of money, but I mean, if she had raised 1/10 that amount of money, she still wins this race.
Yeah, I wanted to mention real quick, I know we're running short on time, John. I forgot to say before, we've seen a lot of differences in Livingston over the last few election cycles on, and particularly the last one, on in-person voting and on AV. In Lana's case, she killed on both. So that was really impressive on her part. On this one, what's, I think, interesting to pay attention to is Mallory McMorrow is now a national figure, and that's not what she was a year ago. This race and what happened during it and some of the things that were thrown her way elevated her to a position that's incredibly unique, to the point that not only did she have super good political talent, and did she also have a really good team around her husband, or her team around her pounced on this thing and took advantage of it. Now she has national folks coming in. She's hanging out with Liz Smith and doing all these other things. So she's going to be somebody to watch going forward as a result of what happened in the last few months.
All right. You want to talk about Beeler and Eisen, Kyle?
Yeah, I don't have a lot of insight in this one. Beeler and Eisen's district actually it should have been a 50-50 split, but Beeler is really an up and comer. He gets this political thing. It really comes natural to him. Eisen's kind of the hometown boy who'd run a couple times before, and he finally had won. And he's been around town for a long time, but you get a door knock from Andrew Beeler, and you get a door knock from Gary Eisen, and I think it's pretty clear who's going to connect a little better.
Would have required Gary Eisen knocking doors.
There's that too.
It matters. It matters. All right. Mary Kavanaugh survived despite her DUI. Any thoughts?
This was one of the biggest surprises of the night for me.
Why?
Yeah, why?
I mean, partly because of the same dynamic that we talked about in the McMorrow Bullock race, right? I expected that Vicky would do a better job in the sort of white flight suburbs of Oakland County than she did, particularly given that, voting rates tend to be higher in primaries out there. Kavanaugh, obviously the name does not hurt, that does not hurt at all. But Kavanaugh did a good job here, both in the city and outside the city. Like you don't win this district just by winning in the city, given what turnout rates in the city of Detroit look like. She did a nice job here. I was very impressed.
All right.
Yeah, I would say too, she did a good job post DUI too. I mean, the videos are always embarrassing, but I think that her apologies, emails and social media posts were very heartfelt. And Detroit is always known for being forgiving for people who make a mistake. And she does have the Kavanaugh name, which still does carry with a lot of folks, given her grandpa was the mayor. And I think that and just good hard campaigning really worked to her advantage.
All right. 35th district, Annette Glenn, she was kind of throwing some mud there, some shade on Christian, and it didn't work out.
Well, yeah, it didn't work out for Velasquez, that's for sure. Yeah, boy, the Glens just, they know how to campaign one way, and that's hard. Right, Sean? I mean, and if the punch goes below the belt, then it just went below the belt. You know what?
That was from the start. She was nailing Kelly right at the beginning, and then moved on to who she needed to punch next.
Well, it's as if they learned something from Gary's Senate race, and this time there was no Consumers Energy money to push back on Gary Glenn, and because the Consumers doesn't have an axe to grind with Annette. It was all about Gary. Gary's the one who was trying to end this quote unquote monopoly of electricity. Annette never really has that agenda. That's not really her thing. So you just got hard campaigning. Kelly's been out of the game a little bit, and Velasquez has never been in the game before. So, and then Martin Blank, God bless him. I mean, that's pretty close as far as what he did. He knocked on a lot of doors. That's all I know. He did a lot of work.
Yep. He worked. Yep, he did. All right, 37th district. You want to walk through these quickly?
Yeah, well, you just can't fool Democrats about who a real Democrat is. So,
Randy Bishop is not a very good Democrat.
No, I think Trucker Randy thought he was going to be really clever, but Democrats know who a real Democrat is, and Randy Bishop is not. So, and then in the other one, John DeMoose, he was on TV really early in this campaign, and while he didn't work as hard as Tristan Cole, he probably worked smarter. And getting these TV ads up as soon as he did, and concentrating on somewhere other than Traverse City, like Emmett County and the UP, ended up pushing him over the top.
And Adrian, you asked me to put this one on here because you thought it was interesting. This Eubanks, is he right? Are we headed towards civil war, like our quote of the day suggests?
No, because number one, I mentioned John Gibbs being mentally hilarious. Jade DeBoyer makes her look like, or not Jade DeBoyer, Jackie Eubanks makes him look like Stephen Hawking. Like Jackie's an idiot and a crazy one to boot. And thankfully for all of us, she's not going to be a state representative next year. I'm not a lobbyist anymore, but I know all my lobbyist friends are super excited about that. DeBoyer did a couple of things that were really smart here. He ran up the score in St. Clair County, and he was nice to Jacob Scarbeck. Scarbeck took a lot of Jackie Eubanks votes. In St. Clair County especially, Scarbeck got north of 20%. He filed a waiver, by the way. And he was aiming directly at that America First base of votes that Jackie had in this race. Got north of 20% in St. Clair County, and got into the mid-teens in Macomb, right? And again, that support was not coming out of Jay DeBoyer. It was all coming out of Jackie. This is a close race without Jacob Scarbeck in it. with Jacob Scarbeck in it, Jay DeBoyer wins in a walk. I am sure, and when Jackie's done talking about Civil War and revolution, she's going to try and raise some BS about the fact that Jay DeBoyer is the clerk in St. Clair County. I'm sure there will be nutty allegations. Maybe she'll team up with Ryan Kelly to make the allegations nuttier. But the fact of the matter is he ate her lunch.
Yeah, I'll just add on to that
All
real
right.
quick. You see, when we again talk about how valuable the Trump endorsement can be, you have to think still about politics in terms of concentric circles. So the Trump endorsement might get you the inner ultra MAGA circle first, but what we keep seeing is that when you get a step further, there's a whole lot of people who are in the Republican Party who support Trump, but outside of that inner ultra MAGA circle still are looking at the candidate and the quality of them. They didn't vote for Reagan. They didn't vote for Eubanks. So that's still a factor to get the full effect of a Trump endorsement. You still have to probably come across as playing.
Right, that's a perfect transition for us too. I can get this slide to advance. Trump's record. Let's quickly go through this because I want to answer some questions if we have any from the audience members. What do you guys think? 6-0 of Congress. That's pretty good. One for 1-0. I should have said 1-0 there for governor. But he split the legislature.
Outside of Gibbs, 5 of those were chip shots in Congress. And then he came into Dixon as she was pulling away. So the legislative ones, I wonder how much he regrets because those were made very, very early in the cycle. In some cases before maps were even released. Steve Cara, didn't even, he ended up running in a completely different district. Other people's districts were completely changed. In hindsight, he cares about his record. He may have wished he hadn't have made those in the legislature. May have just wanted to wait.
John Rocha didn't make the ballot, right? Like pre-filing deadline endorsements from a national figure in state legislative races, that's real dumb.
All right. Anything else, John, you want to add? All right. I have just a couple questions and we'll probably be done here. We had one that was answered, but you might want to address it anyways. You might want to discuss that Levin lost touch with people in the district. He's getting arrested in DC while he should have been going door to door from our good friend Dennis Muchmore. I think somebody answered it online, but you want to talk about that? Anybody want to add anything else?
I don't recommend doing doors in a campaign, but you need to be seen in your district and not in Washington, D.C. getting arrested with Ilhan Omar and AOC. Those folks in D.C. can't vote for you, and neither can the voters in Minnesota 5 or, that didn't look like a real strong look to me. He was desperate though, right? He knew he was behind. He wasn't going to have the money. He had to tack left. It was his only chance. Didn't work, which I think most reasonable observers would have told him, but got to try something.
All right. Yeah. Go ahead, John. Do you have something you want to add?
I was going to say, I said earlier that Carl Levin would have never gotten himself arrested and sat around doing that. A little bit different generation there. And then I later saw that the Andy Son, I don't know if he actually got arrested, but he was part of the sit-in. They took over Chuck Schumer's office last week. So new tactics, not sure how effective they are.
All right. We have another comment, and I want to get your guys' reaction to. These lines are surely going to be invalidated by the federal courts next year. Yes? No? What do you think?
There's got to be suits on the Senate one for sure.
Yeah, there'll be lawsuits, but I don't litigate maps. It was pretty clearly a racial gerrymander, but it's also not clear that matters anymore in federal court.
Yeah, that's what I kind of think of. And then you got to balance it too. Federal courts really don't like to mess with this stuff unless they absolutely have to. So yeah. We'll see. We'll see.
The state Senate, it's going to get a lot whiter for sure. The state House, there's a chance that it doesn't. It just only there's one fewer black member in the state House, but there could be more depending on if a couple of those people in 50-50 districts or lean Republican seats win. So it may be different. We'll see. I got to imagine that the Republicans will try and invalidate them, particularly if they lose.
Yep. All right, I got to answer this one from our good friend Amanda Fisher. Was the cover of this year's election almanac some sort of commentary on this election cycle? If you haven't seen the cover, it's a full moon over the Capitol, kind of spooky looking. It fit, didn't it? No, we picked it long before we realized how spooky it was going to wind up being. But I like the shot, though. It's a cool shot. But it did fit, didn't it? Let's see. How does the primary leave the state and House Senate looking in November? Anybody want to make a prediction on party breakdowns post the general election for the state House or state Senate?
I think this is basically 100% dependent on how the governor does, right? The Republican AG nominee sucks. The Republican SOS nominee sucks. It remains to be seen whether Tudor Dixon can be competitive with the governor or not. But essentially, the way I've been explaining this to people, if Governor Whitmer wins by fewer than 5 points, or she loses, right, then the legislative chambers are safe. If she wins by like 5 to 7 points, the Senate's in danger, but the House is probably safe. If she gets the same margins that she got against John, in 2018, then everything's on the table.
I would say that as far as districts where they're going to be a competitive challenge, in most cases, at least one of the parties, the Republicans and the Democrats, had just one candidate ready to go. There was no primary. And if there was, it was really just kind of a token primary. I think the caucuses have gotten a lot more disciplined in making sure, like Jamie Churches in Downriver, that she's the only Democrat. If you go up into Oakland County, Kuhn is the only Republican running in a 50-50 district. And these are just examples. But you saw that all over the place. There were situations where they had primaries and competitive races. But from what I saw on the Republican side and actually on the Democrat side, the candidate that the parties really wanted to have win, like let's say Kleinfeld in the state Senate for the Democrats, they won. Maybe the one exception I can think of was Counts losing to Bob Howie in one of the downriver races. But otherwise, the Freedom Fund, which funds these races, the Freedom Fund did really good. They went 20. I've got it on the back of my screen here. Actually, I was working on this story before this. They went 23 for 28, whereas the Trump Republicans, this is the Michigan Trump Republicans, which is independent of Donald Trump. These are just people who use his name to try and win races. They won 12, lost 19. All right, so there's not really a good way to spin that. You win 12, you lose 19. That's not even 500. So that's not good. And so that's good news for the Republican caucus to hear those kind of numbers.
Yeah, I think all that makes sense on the legislative side. We didn't see any seats or results last night that automatically tanked a seat for the GOP. All things being equal, the GOP still has the advantage. We've seen some generic numbers at the national level kind of like even out a little bit lately. Maybe people are just giving up on the world. And we've seen this sort of unusual thing, at least in the polling for now, where people are willing to separate Whitmer from Biden. And even though Adrian gave out 3 sucks during this thing, and one of them was for Biden, people seem to be like setting him aside a little bit. And Whitmer's going to have that advantage to be running nonstop wall-to-wall ads from here to the general election day, talking about herself in a way that's different. And you hear that thread through all the same ads, no matter what the issue is. We're getting stuff done now. That is not what Joe Biden is doing. That's what she's doing. So we're going to hear a lot about that. So what will maybe, to what Adrian said, make a big dent in what happens with the legislatures? What happens over the next, the rest of August for Tudor Dixon? Her supporters are probably going to hit the airwaves in some way. They have to. She can't go dark. She's got some hurdles to get over. She's got to pick a lieutenant governor candidate. There's going to be people pulling at her from every different direction. Put in somebody that can run the Senate. Put in somebody that can go after and be a hatchet person against Whitmer. All these other things. I personally tend to believe lieutenant governor, as long as you don't screw it up, doesn't matter as much. But she's got to then go to the convention, give a speech that unifies everybody, which I think she'll be pretty solid at. But having a candidate that gets through that convention so that she doesn't have a week and a half of stories that are all about how the Trump convention pulled her down. I think our team can get through that, but it's going to be a really important thing. And meanwhile, you will have the DGA and the governor on the air, $500,000 a week each, plowing forward. The RGA already jumped in and tweeted out their first 2 ads against the Democrat in Arizona this morning. So I have to be watching for that as well to see how quick they're willing to come in and layer on top of what the DeVosses and the folks in Michigan have been doing for Tudor Dixon thus far.
All right, I'm going to do one more question and then we're going to wrap it up. Seems like women candidates now own D primaries. Very few exceptions. Thoughts? Oh, where can I get it? Where can I get Reurink's fly headphones? Question mark. And is Sellek in a Starbucks? Let's start with the women candidates.
Yeah, every cycle it
I wanna
seemed like
know
somebody
if
wanted to
Selleck's
say
in a
it was
Starbucks. Go ahead.
year of the NASCAR dad, it was year of the mom. It's the era of women, period. That's what we're in right now.
All right.
I 100% agree
And
with
you
that,
are in
and not just in
Starbucks.
Dem primaries. Yeah.
Yes, I sure am. I'm in lovely Traverse City in a Starbucks, and everyone's staring
Oh,
at
you
me
already
like, what
drove
is
up.
that guy
I'm
doing?
jealous.
Yep. And these are just Apple headphones. So there you go. I think that's it. We also got a question. Will the presentation be available after the webinar? I'm going to include it with the email. Everybody that's attended will get a copy of the email and the link to the video. We're also going to send it to everybody who could not attend. We appear to have had some kind of issue that blocked a number of our people, but they will be getting it, a recording of it sent to them at 2 o'clock this afternoon. So with that, I guess we're going to conclude, everybody. Thank you to our guests, John and Adrian. Thank you, Kyle, for all your work and your analysis. And with that, we're going to wrap it up for the day. And hopefully we'll be doing it again after the general election.
All right.
All right.
Sounds good.
Sounds good. Have a great day.